As one of his final acts as president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, better known by his acronym AMLO, signed an act that placed the National Guard under the supervision of the Mexican Army. Originally established in 2019 as a civilian force, the National Guard would now operate under the Armed Forces' control. But why did AMLO go back on his promise? And how has the National Guard been utilized during his presidency? Today on Please, Please, Please Give Me Power, Culture, and Development, we'll explore the major events, strategies, and intentions that pushed Mexico towards greater militarism during AMLO's time in office. To understand how Mexico arrived at its current level of militarism, we will first define what militarism entails and then examine the state of the country when AMLO took office. Militarism is the political belief that a state should pursue and maintain strong military methods to achieve national interests. On July 1, 2018, the historic presidential victory of Andrés Manuel López Obrador and his political party, the National Regeneration Movement, commonly referred to as Morena, sparked hope for a safer, more equitable Mexico. Winning with 53% of the popular vote, AMLO promised to root out corruption and reduce violence through what he called the Fourth Transformation. This new era aimed to rank among pivotal moments in Mexico's history, alongside the War of Independence, the Reform War, and the Mexican Revolution, moments that AMLO argues worked to make the country a true democracy. After two unsuccessful presidential runs, AMLO was eager to usher in this transformative period. He vowed to listen to everyone, care for everyone, and respect everyone, but above all, to prioritize the most humble and forgotten, in pursuit of a more just nation. However, his optimism collided with the harsh reality of the country he inherited, a nation plagued by deep-seated corruption and escalating violence. National corruption stemmed largely from the long political dominance of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, known as El PRI, which prioritized political and economic interests over those of the public. The party bore significant responsibility for the deep-rooted corruption present in the government, being accused of embezzling tens of millions of dollars, surveilling citizens, and granting contracts based on bribery. The public suffered under the government's negligence, which created an environment where crime could transpire unacknowledged, enabling the emergence of drug cartels. Since 2006, under former presidents Felipe Calderón and Enrique Peña Nieto, Mexico has relied heavily on military forces to combat the growing influence of cartels. Calderón in particular declared a war on drugs, deploying the military to suppress cartel violence. However, violence only intensified. By 2017, the year before AMLO's election, Mexico reported its deadliest year on record, with 31,174 murders, a sharp increase from the 10,429 murders reported in 2006. Faced with this crisis, AMLO and his team needed a plan to restore safety. A vocal critic of the militarism implemented by his predecessors, AMLO's 2018 campaign slogan, "Hugs, not bullets," emphasized a more humanitarian approach to addressing the social and systemic root causes of cartel activity. On November 18, 2018, just 3 weeks before his inauguration, AMLO was set to unveil his National Peace and Security Plan, a comprehensive strategy to make the nation safer throughout his presidency. However, instead of pursuing a humanitarian response and reducing the presence of the military, López Obrador did the opposite. Central to his plan was the establishment of a National Guard, a civilian public security institution that he argued would combat organized crime in Mexico. In his words, "It is for the good of our country." With this simple statement, he appealed to national unity and patriotism, framing the National Guard as a collective responsibility for Mexico's future. The media and the public were skeptical. Domestic and international news outlets voiced their concerns. In March 2019, the Brookings Institution, an American think tank, published a report titled "AMLO Security Policy: Creative Ideas, Tough Reality." The report noted that Improving public safety, especially Mexico's soaring murder rate, is the toughest challenge of Mexico's new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. But that many aspects of his security strategy, such as the formation of the new National Guard, remain questionable and unclear, and are unlikely to reduce violence quickly. It highlighted the contradictions in AMLO's approach, pointing out that while the head of the National Guard is civilian, much of its leadership is military, blending military forces with federal police. Civilians were also uneasy. Past presidents had made similar commitments to improving public safety, but their measures failed, leading to increased violence and a growing military presence. Government corruption extended to law enforcement, fostering low public trust in the police. According to the Institute for Economics and Peace, only 18% of Mexicans expressed high trust in public institutions in 2017, and just 7% trusted municipal police. Yet, AMLO's victory told a different story. Winning 53% of the popular vote, he became the first candidate to achieve a landslide victory since 1988, and the first president not aligned with El PRI or its predecessors since the Mexican Revolution. To understand how civilians felt during this time in Mexico, I welcome two guests to my podcast. The first is Rafael Muñoz, my uncle, a citizen of the town of Zacatepec de Hidalgo in the state of Morelos. Hi Rafael, thank you for joining and taking the time to accept this call. I just want to begin by asking, how did you feel after Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the 2018 presidential election?
Nos sentimos muy contentos porque como su campaña decía que él era la promesa de México, mucha gente creímos en eso, porque ya estábamos cansados de la corrupción de 80 años del PRI y del PAN y del robo que hacían al país y de la impunidad que había con ello, ¿verdad? Entonces cuando Andrés Manuel López Obrador llegó a la presidencia fue una alegría tremenda por la esperanza que significaba un cambio en el país.
Was AMLO your candidate of choice?
Sí. Siempre fue nuestro candidato, ¿verdad? A pesar de que el PRIAN y las televisoras, ¿verdad? La prensa y el social media decían que era un peligro para México, la gente creíamos que él podía hacer el cambio.
Is there a reason why you did not vote for the other candidates, such as the Institutional Revolutionary Party, el PRI candidate, or the National Action, PAN candidate?
Hay muchas razones, las principales fue porque robaban mucho, la segunda por la corrupción, los del PAN, Felipe Calderón, por su guerra fallida contra el narcotráfico, que dejó cientos de miles de muertos en el país. Todas esas razones, fueron las que llevaron a que apoyáramos a Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
I now welcome Fabiola Villaverde, my aunt, a resident of the town Chicabasco in the state of Hidalgo. Hi Fabiola, thank you for joining and accepting this call. Now, I just want to begin by asking, how did you feel after Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the 2018 presidential election?
La verdad no sabía qué esperar que iba a ser el presidente, pero al transcurso de su presidencia que estuvo él, miramos que hubo muchos cambios en la presidencia, hubo más ayudas.
Was AMLO your candidate of choice?
Sí fue el candidato preferido porque vino a cambiar, en que vino a darles ayudas a las personas de la tercera edad y pudimos ver que hubo una ayuda muy grande para la gente que pues prácticamente no había mucha pobreza en la gente de la tercera edad y pues al ver la ayuda que les dieron estuvo mejor para el cambio que se hizo.
Is there a reason why you did not vote for the other candidates, such as the Institutional Revolutionary Party, el PRI candidate, or the National Action, PAN candidate?
No se prefirió ninguno de esos candidatos porque prácticamente venían haciendo lo mismo, entonces ya el pueblo de México ya estaba cansado de lo mismo y querían un cambio.
Based on these two interviews, we can see that the people had made their decision, fundamentally placing their faith and future in AMLO's hands. On March 26, 2019, AMLO legally created the National Guard through a presidential decree. The Official Gazette of the Federation, Mexico's official government publication, announced the President's Executive Act. It stated that the National Guard would comprise the federal police, military police, and naval police, and that the decree would take effect the following day. With the presidential power to make and execute decisions, AMLO successfully established the National Guard despite public concerns. The official deployment of the National Guard occurred just 4 months later. In July 2019, the federal police was dissolved and replaced by the National Guard, composed of 77% former military personnel. The decision to dissolve the federal police signaled AMLO's strategic shift towards consolidating law enforcement under a single, centralized entity. Critics argued this was a symbolic move rather than an effective security measure, as the majority of the National Guard consisted of personnel with military backgrounds rather than a civilian police. This enforced the perception that AMLO was militarizing public security, contrary to his "Hugs, not bullets" campaign promise. The integration of military personnel also sparked concerns about human rights violations, as the armed forces had a history of abuses during their engagement in domestic security. The new power AMLO held as president allowed him to pursue measures that would enable the execution of his vision for Mexico. But how? Well, AMLO did not do this alone. Congress played a critical role in the legal establishment of the National Guard. In February 2019, a constitutional reform was passed with support from Morena's majority in Congress, amending Articles 21, 31, and 73 of the Mexican Constitution to formally create the National Guard as a civilian public security force. However, in practice, its structure was heavily militarized, as it integrated personnel and resources from the federal police, military police, and naval police. Congress approved this despite significant public and international criticism, with Morena framing it as a necessary step to address escalating violence. Morena's congressional majority, led by leaders such as Maria Delgado, echoed AMLO's public rhetoric by arguing that the National Guard was a moral and strategic imperative to protect the lives of Mexicans. During this time, the president repeatedly framed the National Guard as necessary to bring peace to the people of Mexico, highlighting the failure of previous administrations to curb violence. To get approval to create the National Guard, López Obrador and his party focused on discrediting the federal police, which AMLO referred to as a symbol of corruption and inefficiency. AMLO ultimately presented the National Guard as a cornerstone of his fourth transformation, emphasizing its potential to restore public safety and dismantle corruption in law enforcement. With the power to influence the agenda and the public's perception to get his plan approved, he was one step closer to fulfilling his developmental goals. In 2020, the nation was moved towards greater militarism when the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, was placed in charge of various social and economic infrastructure projects, which included building new branches for the government bank, Banco de Bienestar, the Felipe Ángeles International Airport, Sections 5, 6, and 7 of the Tren Maya, the Felipe Carrillo Puerto Airport in Tulum, and the remodeling of the Palenque and Chetmul airports. The 2020 federal budget, approved by Congress with a strong backing from Morena, allocated unprecedented resources directly to SEDENA for these infrastructure projects. For example, the construction of the Felipe Ángeles International Airport, also known as AIFA, was authorized under Decree DOF 2019-1229, which allowed SEDENA to lead the project with military engineers. Additionally, the Tren Maya project received supplemental support through laws that transferred law management and operational responsibilities to military-controlled entities. Through executive decrees and legislative approval, AMLO empowered SEDENA to act as a contractor for public works, bypassing private firms. AMLO, with support from his party, justified this militarized approach by stating, "The armed forces are not just soldiers. They are builders, protectors, and patriots. They are the most trustworthy institution in our country." He frequently criticized civilian contractors as plagued by corruption and inefficiency, framing the military as incorruptible and capable of delivering on projects that align with his fourth transformation goals. Assigning SEDENA control over key infrastructure projects expanded its role beyond national defense, blurring the lines between military and civilian responsibilities. AMLO justified the decision by arguing that the military was less prone to corruption and inefficiency compared to civilian agencies. However, critics highlighted the risk of granting the military unchecked influence over public infrastructure, raising concerns about transparency, cost overruns, and a lack of civilian oversight. Regardless, granting the Navy control over maritime transportation and customs operations. These reforms place the Navy in control of strategic maritime activities, including ports, shipping, and communications. The move was framed as a necessary measure to combat smuggling and drug trafficking, but it also solidified the military's dominance in areas traditionally managed by civilian authorities, deepening concerns about militarism. AMLO presented this move as a way to rescue Mexico's ports from organized crime. He argued, "The Navy has the discipline and strength to protect our resources and sovereignty, unlike past administrations that allowed corruption to flourish." By framing these reforms as essential for reclaiming sovereignty over Mexico's ports, AMLO further integrated the military into civilian functions and reinforced his commitment to national unity. Morena legislators championed these reforms in Congress, using the majority to push them through without significant debate, echoing AMLO's narrative that the Navy's involvement would strengthen national security and reduce corruption in port operations. The last act of 2020 that would increase the presence of the military in civilian activities occurred in August, when SEDENA was tasked with the logistical operation of transporting and distributing textbooks, an administrative function typically handled by civilian agencies. This decision was made via an executive order, which Morena legislators defended as an example of the military's reliability and productivity. While this demonstrated efficiency, it also exemplified how civilian tasks were increasingly being delegated to the military, raising fears of its overreach into non-security related areas of life. Regardless, by involving SEDENA in distributing textbooks, AMLO highlighted the military's role as a multifunctional institution capable of handling logistical challenges, supporting his broad vision of a unified, structured government. In the following year, AMLO would move to expand the military's powers. The Army and the Navy were given broader authority to manage customs operations and control major ports to combat smuggling and organized crime. These changes were formalized through amendments to the customs law and related legislation passed by Congress. With Morena's majority, the laws were expedited despite opposition from minority parties and civil society groups. The reforms allowed the military to replace civilian customs officials, positioning it as the primary authority in combating smuggling and organized crime at ports and borders. By transferring control of customs operations to the military, the government aimed to reduce corruption and cartel influence. This decision granted the armed forces substantial economic and logistical power over vital trade hubs, further entrenching their role in civilian governance. Critics pointed out that militarizing customs operations could lead to militarized corruption rather than solving the root problems. Yet, AMLO justified the move with stark language, stating, "We cannot allow criminal groups to infiltrate our borders. the military is the only institution with the capability and moral strength to combat smuggling. He frequently referred to ports as doors to crime that needed to be secured. Shortly after, the Navy began to oversee the ecotourism companies of Islas Marias and the 16 offices of the National Harbor System. The transfer of administrative responsibilities to the Navy was enabled by agreements between federal agencies and legislative approval from the Morena-dominated Congress. Morena facilitated the legislative changes and defended them publicly, emphasizing the military's role as a protector of national security and economic stability, as these measures were portrayed as necessary to ensure the preservation of natural resources and efficient management. Yet, expanding military involvement in tourism and harbor management represented a significant shift. It allowed the armed forces to exercise control over economic and environmental initiatives, showcasing their growing influence in diverse sectors of governance. Nonetheless, the move was ultimately pushed by AMLO, who described it as a way to protect our natural heritage and ensure transparency, arguing that the military could prevent private exploitation of Mexico's resources. With the help of Congress and his appeal to national morale, he worked to make sure Mexico could prosper and achieve its fourth transformation. Like in 2020, Sedena was once again involved in the distribution of resources. However, this time it was for COVID-19 relief. In 2021, Congress approved emergency funding that allowed Sedena and the Secretary of the Navy, widely referred to as SEMAR, to play a central role in distributing vaccines and medical supplies. The military collaborated with the Ministry of Health to coordinate nationwide logistics, efficiency compared to civilian agencies. This demonstrated the military's capacity to address public health crises, reinforcing AMLO's narrative that the armed forces were indispensable to national development. However, though the military's involvement was largely praised during the crisis, critics warned that normalizing its involvement in public health could weaken civilian institutions. AMLO would continue to expand the responsibilities and longevity of the National Guard in 2020 to ensure the actualization of his plans for Mexico. In August, more than 1,500 officers of the Navy took on the security and administration of both the AIFA and Aeropuerto Internacional de la Ciudad de Mexico. This transfer was formalized through Executive Decree DOF 2020-0809 in critical infrastructure to oversee operations at the two airports. We will finally have transparent and secure airport operations, budget, allocating resources for military-led management. In response, the Navy deployed personnel to manage security, logistics, and administration management. The administration framed this move as a response to corruption and inefficiencies, but critics noted it further entrenched the military's role in public administration, diminishing civilian oversight. This marked another instance of the military taking over civilian infrastructure management. The administration framed this move as a response to corruption and inefficiencies, but critics noted it further entrenched the military's role in public administration, diminishing civilian oversight. Just 2 months later, Congress would approve a constitutional reform that would extend the participation of the Army in public security until 2028. In October, Decree DOF 2020-1026 was passed, which amended Article 5 of the Transitional Provisions of the National Guard Law to extend military involvement in public security for 6 more years. This further required political maneuvering, as constitutional amendments demand a 2/3 majority. Morena, led by legislators such as Ignacio Mayer, negotiated with opposition parties and regional representatives to secure the necessary votes, using the argument that public safety was a national emergency. This decision institutionalized the military's expanded role in domestic law enforcement for the future. Opponents argued that it entrenched militarism as a long-term strategy rather than a temporary solution to security issues. undermining efforts to build a civilian-led public security framework. To justify the reform, AMLO stated, "The armed forces are not here to replace the police, but to work alongside them until we have the security Mexico deserves." He appealed to public fears, framing the extension as a necessary response to reduce crime and build a secure nation. In just 4 years, the military had allowed AMLO to swiftly and smoothly execute his developmental plans without resistance from political opponents. Recognizing the power and potential of the military, AMLO would continue to increase its presence in civilian life to fulfill as much of its fourth transformation before the end of his term. Speaking of greater military power, ownership of the state-owned company Tren Maya project was transferred to the military through legislative reforms that amended the General Law of National Assets and the Federal Law of Parastatal Entities on April 21, 2023. These changes granted SEDENA control over the construction, operation, and revenue of the project, which intends to construct an intercity railway connecting major tourist destinations in the Yucatan Peninsula with lesser-known inland Mayan sites to celebrate Mexico's indigenous heritage and rich, diverse culture. AMLO defended the decision by saying, "Tren Maya is a project for the people, and who better than the army to manage it? They have shown they are capable, incorruptible, and dedicated to Mexico's development." He framed this move as part of his effort to bring justice and opportunity to the most forgotten regions of the country. Critics warned that granting ownership of an infrastructure project like the Tren Maya to the army blurred the lines between military and civilian authority, increasing the risk of politicization and reducing accountability. By granting the military control of this key economic project, AMLO embedded SEDENA deeper into the infrastructure and economic fabric of the nation, aligning it with this transformative vision of addressing inequality and fostering national unity. To continue AMLO's vision for the nation, in August 2023, the government announced the creation of a new airline, which would be administered by SEDENA with a budget not approved by Congress. The creation of the military-run airline, Aerolínea del Bienestar, was authorized through Executive Decree DOF 2023-0810, with AMLO bypassing legislative approval for its budget. Funds were reallocated directly to SEDENA, sparking criticism from opposition parties for sidestepping the legislative branch. Despite this, AMLO defended the decision as necessary for national development and sovereignty in air travel. AMLO also justified the airline as a project of and for the people, arguing that military efficiency and oversight would guarantee its success. He criticized private airlines, stating, "We cannot rely on foreign or private interests to ensure affordable and reliable air travel for Mexicans." This initiative further positioned the military as a key player in AMLO's strategy to strengthen national infrastructure and reduce dependency on private corporations, reinforcing the Fourth Transformation's themes of public welfare and sovereignty. This brings us to the latest movement to push Mexico towards greater militarism. On September 11th, Mexico's Congress approved a reform in the Constitution to transfer the National Guard under the control of the military. After debating through the night, the governing Morena party and its allies overcame opposition fueled by concerns from human rights organizations and the United Nations. They denied the change would militarize the country, instead saying the military would help the National Guard become a more effective security force to reduce the ever-growing violence in the nation. By placing the National Guard, the most trustworthy force according to AMLO, under the armed forces, López Obrador continued to argue that they would eradicate violence and corruption in the nation. Beyond security, however, this victory also symbolized a broader triumph for López Obrador, as it safeguarded his transformative measures aimed at reshaping Mexico's political and social landscape. Ultimately, AMLO, relying on Morena's congressional dominance, systematically used executive decrees, constitutional reforms, and legislative amendments to embed the military deeply into civilian life. AMLO's rhetoric consistently focused on themes of patriotism, national sovereignty, and efficiency, while Morena facilitated these policies through its congressional majority. In the end, Andrés Manuel López Obrador portrayed militarism as a necessary tool to achieve the fourth transformation, framing the armed forces as the creators of security, development, and justice for all Mexicans.